Masechet Yevamot, Daf Kaf Gimel. We've been dealing with a redundancy between these two Pesukim in Vayikra 18. Pasuk 9 is talking about a half-sister, either from a father's side or mother's side, and then adds in these words that seem redundant themselves, Moledet Bayit or Moledet Hotz. And Peshat seems to be saying that whether that child is brought up within the same household or outside the household of the person that may be sleeping with her, it doesn't matter. So this would be maybe parallel to if it's a sister on the father's side. Presumably, if we assume that children are brought up more often in the father's house, then modedet bayit would be ervatachot bat avicha. Whereas if on the mother's side she had a child with some other guy, so probably that daughter would be brought up by that other guy. So that would be moledet chutz. The point is, it doesn't matter where the child grows up, in the same household or not in the same household, like are they adopted or not, into the household structure makes no difference. A half sister is prohibited. Fine. So we know that. And then this pasuk comes along and says, "Ervat bat eshet avicha," and this is your father's wife's daughter. Now, if it's a step sister, meaning that she had a child with another man, whereas so that they're not related at all, well, then that actually would be permitted. A stepbrother and stepsister, there is no prohibition of them marrying each other. In fact, the Chafetz Chaim did just that. So it's not talking about that, and that's clear from the next words. Moledet avicha, it is your father's child. So this is referring to a full sibling. So why do we need this? But this pasuk, it doesn't have to be a full sibling. It has to say legitimate child. It could be the man has two wives, and so this guy is from one wife, and he has another child, a daughter from could be another wife to whom he is married, and that is achotechahi. So this is for sure a half sister from the father's side. That was already dealt with in pasuk 9. So now we have two pasukim regarding the same case. The same case here is like this: a man has two wives, with one, Reuven, with one he has a daughter, and they are prohibited to each other, but we know this twice. And so we saw two solutions to this problem. One is to double up on the prohibition and say, in this case, someone is liable twice to capital punishment, to karet for this. To karet, not capital punishment, to karet for doing this, and that's the opinion of Rabbanan. That's their solution. By the way, this is a tough question. Even if you look at later commentaries, have no simple solution to this other than to say, well, yeah, maybe it's redundant. Okay, so this is the best answer that anyone has thought of so far. However, Rabbi Yosef by Rabbi Yehuda says no. There's only one prohibition that can apply, and so that would be this pasuk here. One prohibition for half sister on this side or on that side. And so now we ask to Rabbi Yosef, then what do you do with pasuk 11 if it does not apply to this case? What case does it apply to? What is it coming to teach us? And so we already saw a solution, which is that it includes a child from it excludes a child from a non-Jewish mother. So if a man has a son, a full son, Jewish, everything, and then he cohabits with a non-Jew, and that child then will be not Jewish. If that brother takes that sister, there is no liability of karet. And so that's what's saying that it can only apply, this pasuk 9 only applies if it is bat eshet avicha, if it's someone that the husband can at least have a possibility of marriage to, and there is no possibility of marriage to a non-Jew, and therefore that is more lenient, not liable. Good. So that was the answer of Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda for him. And now we are going to ask three other possibilities. Why not say it's excluding a rape victim? And that is where we left off, and we saw the answer to that already also, right? So say father's rape victim. By the way, throughout these sugyot, we're always talking about the father's rape victim. Really, you could just say mistress or someone who's born out of wedlock. I think this is the more common case because in those days, no woman in their right mind would agree willingly to have a child out of wedlock because she has no protection, no financial backing, and so that would not be a good deal for her. So the most likely case that would happen is if the father had forced her. So that's why I usually talks about that case. But you could equally translate a wife's mistress out of wedlock. And so maybe it's talking about that case. No, it would not exclude that case because we proved from Rava already that there is no difference between the status of a child who is a rape victim or who was from fully married. In both cases, that is considered full lineage, a full son or daughter, and therefore the prohibition of incest between those half siblings would be the same liability as if it was a half siblings from a different mother. Would be the same. Okay, so it couldn't exclude that case. So now we have two more possibilities to go through. Perhaps pasuk 11 comes to add that if the father gets together with someone who he is prohibited to be with from isur lav, like a kohen to a divorcee or something like that, and maybe that's what's coming to exclude that the child from that union would not be not liable if they were half siblings. And Papa rejects that because after all, although they're prohibited from being together, but if they don't go ahead and do a kiddushin, it takes effect. This is important to Rasha because here's what we're going to learn, that Isur Lav does take effect. From the case, the classic case of divorce and returning divorcee, if a person has two wives, one beloved and one who is hated. This is referring to the case that you cannot favor the child of the loved one and give him double and not the other one. Okay, and in any case, a man has two wives. It calls one beloved and one hated. And so, why call them this? Well, I mean, the Peshat is referring to subjectively. The man who has two wives, he loves he loves one more and wants to give that person, the child of that person, double, even though he's not actually born first. And so the Torah has to come and say, no, you can't take into account your feelings. But it's the Torah itself that's calling them Ahuva and Sinu'ah. So does Hashem love one over the other? And it sounds like it's an objective adjective, not just about what he thinks. Ella, so rather the Midrash is saying, Ahuva, Ahuva bi nisu'eha, Sinu'ah benisu'eha, v'amar kitihena. Rather, what Ahuva and Sinu'ah refer to are beloved in terms of having a full proper marriage, and Sinu'ah is referring to someone who has a negative marriage, a marriage that violates a law. And so that's what it's referring to. And yet, it says kitihena, that the man has legitimately both of these wives. And from here we learn that both someone who one can marry with full permission, and someone who may not marry as an isur lav if they go ahead and do that. So it's called sinu'ah, it's called hated before God because this is prohibited. Nevertheless, the marriage is sustained. Okay, so therefore we cannot possibly exclude the daughter from an isur lav from this prohibition to be with her half brother, because this marriage is a full, complete marriage, and so the children will be full, complete children. So these are the half siblings like anyone else. Okay, so so instead, our last possibility is maybe this pasuk 11 here is not coming to exclude the child of a non-Jewish mother, but maybe the child of someone who is asur karet to the father. bat avicha or bat imecha, moledet bait or moledet hus. So the Rebbe is going to say, no, that's not possible, because look at the first pasuk 9. So what does this come to add? Whether they're born in the house or outside of the house. And the answer is ben shomrim lo la'avicha kayem, ben shomrim lo la'avicha hoseh, amaracha mana achotecha hi. So it's pasuk 9 that says whether they are moledet bait, meaning that we would say, oh, remain in the marriage. It's a legitimate marriage, or moledet chutz, where we say this marriage is not legitimate. There is no marriage here at all. Nevertheless, it's called, next words, they are called sisters. And therefore, they are prohibited. Okay, so the child would be prohibited even from a chayave karetot. So we learn that from this extra word here, the moledet hus. All right, but now we ask, Emma ben shomer lo, the same logic that we just used to include chayave karetot in the prohibition of incest for half sisters. You could use that same argument for a child of a non-Jew as follows: Emma ben shomer lo avicha kayem, ben shomer lo avicha hoseh, maracha mana achotecha hi, lerabot achoto mishivcha vegoya. Maybe you'll say whether this is a sustainable marriage or one marriage that is not sustained, and there is no marriage here at all, and yet the Torah comes and says, yes, she is your sister and prohibited, and maybe that will include a child from a non-Jew or from a maidservant who is not Jewish, and yet say that they are prohibited and chayav karet. אמר קרא בת אשת אביך, מי שיש לו אישות לאביך בה, פירת לאחותו משפחה וגויה. No, that's why Pasuk 11 says, the daughter of your father's wife, Eshet Avicha. It can only refer to someone where there is ishut, where the marriage takes hold, as opposed to a non-Jew where the marriage doesn't take hold. Okay, now we have an obvious question. Umaraita, how'd you decide which one to pick? They're actually both equivalent, because even the Isur Karet, the marriage doesn't take hold. So how come we say that half siblings from a non-Jew, there's no liability if they are together, whereas half siblings from a Jew, there is liability, even Isur Karet. In both cases, the marriage does not take hold. And so we answer, mistabera hayave karetot havale lerabot sheken tafse behen kiddushin alma. Yeah, someone who one that you're chayav karet to, even though this son cannot be with that daughter because chayav karet, nevertheless she can be with anybody else in the world who she's not related to, and so she's Jewish. Right? So that is closer than a non-Jew who cannot perform kiddushin with any Jew. So it makes sense that there should be more liable. Okay, when we say adaraba, maybe the opposite, shivcha vegoya havale lerabot, di megayera ledide nami tafse bakidushin. No, maybe there should be a closer relation, kind of more liable, in the case of a non-Jew, because they can always convert, or a maidservant can be freed, which is like conversion, and then that person, she could marry even her half brother, because right, that we saw that law already, and so maybe in the way that is even that's a case where she is more closer to ishut, right? Because technically one could marry that person. Actually, it's talking about the father. The father could convert her and marry, or the son, right? Could convert the daughter and marry. And so in that case, there is more of power of ishut than in the case of isur karet, where the father could never be with that woman, and then the son could never be with the half sister. And so we answer, no, lechi megayera gufa harinahi. No, you can't give me that halacha, because when someone converts, they become like a new person altogether, a new identity. They're not even connected with the person that they were yesterday before they converted. So it's not that there is a possibility of ishut with this non-Jew. No, if this non-Jew turns into a different person, right? Altogether, right? It's like, if you were me, what would you do in my shoes? If I were you, then I would be a different person. So this is so that is not comparable. And so that's what we end with. Okay, so we did not exclude these. So we exclude nothing of these except for a child of a non-Jewish mother is the only one that this pasuk comes and says that the prohibition of a half sister only applies if it's someone with whom either you're married or could have the possibility of being married to. And also isur karet, even though you can't marry them, someone can, but is excluding a non-Jewish half sibling in which there is no liability. Okay, good. Now, v'rabanan, now that we know this law for Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, how does Rabbanan learn that same law that a child from a non-Jewish mother would not have a half sibling from a non-Jewish mother, a non-Jewish half sibling would be no liability? How do they know that? Oh, that's from Shemot 21:4 that we quoted already. That says that a Jewish servant who may have a family with a non-Jewish servant while he's in servitude. Once his service ends after 6 years, then he goes free, and his wife, who's not Jewish, and those children remain with the master, which means the children follow the mother's lineage. And so that's how he would know Shivcha follows the mother's lineage and is not Jewish at all. So that's how he would know that Shivcha would not be liable. Okay. Now, V'Rabbi Yosef, V'Rabbi Yehuda, Chad b'shivcha v'chad b'goya. Don't you have that pasuk in Shemot? What are you going to do with that pasuk? And he says, no, though that pasuk only talks about shivcha. It doesn't talk about a non-Jew. And I need both. I can't assume the same is true with both in both cases, because if I only had this pasuk in Shemot, mishum de'en la hayis, I would say a maidservant have no family lineage. This is an important aspect. One part of what's so terrible about slavery isn't only that they have to work hard and don't have freedom, but also in slavery, their relatives are not considered relatives. The owner owns them like chattel, and therefore, their marriages or children are not have no status, have no legal status. Which is very, very devastating in last generations. Okay, so if I only knew that, if Shivcha, maybe because there is no family lineage, but whereas for non-Jews, there is a sense of family lineage, certainly on their mother's side. That's because they have to follow the laws of erva, and even on the father's side, for some things like the Tanakh often has non-Jews, and it says this is this person, the son of that person, and talks about their father. So there is some status to family lineage in regarding goyim. So I might have thought that perhaps only if shivcha is not liable, but a total non-Jew would be liable in the case of half siblings. And if I only knew about Goya, a non-Jew, mishum de la shaycha b'misvot, aval shivcha de shaycha b'misvot, emala sericha. Then I would say the non-Jew is not liable to mitzvot, and so it's out of the picture totally. But so that one would be not liable. But maybe shivcha, because the Shivcha Kananit has to do mitzvot, and therefore I would say, well, that's kind of half into the Jewish people, and therefore liable in halacha for a half sister. So I need actually both, and so the Rabbi Yehuda has both. He has pasuk 11 here to teach me about non-Jews, and he has the pasuk in Shemot to talk about maidservants. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Rabbanan and say, oh wait, we need another source. You only gave us a source for maidservant, not for non-Jews. Rabbanan ashkechan shivcha goyamin alehu v'chitema nelaf mishivcha. If you say, oh, we'll learn it from Shivcha, no, we just proved that you need both. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Amar Kera, Ki Yasir et Bincha Me'acharai. Pesukim and Devarim are talking about intermarriage with the 7 nations that are in the land of Israel, and says, you shall not make marriages with them. Your daughter you should not give unto a non-Jewish son, nor their son, their daughter take unto your son, because he will turn away your son from following me. Which means if the father is not Jewish, the non-Jewish father will take the Jewish daughter and take her away. So we learn from that. Bincha mi-Israelit karu bincha. Your son from a Jewish woman is called your son. But ben bincha ba min hagoya karu bincha ela bena. But your son from a non-Jewish woman is not called yours, but rather hers. The proof is from the words ki yasir et bincha, that he, meaning the non-Jewish father, will take bincha, meaning that child from that union of the non-Jewish father with the Jewish mother. He will take your son. It's called your son, even though the non-Jewish father is taking him, it's still called your son, which means that the identity as a Jew follows the mother. Therefore, because the child from a non-Jewish mother is not considered Jewish, so all the laws of arayot will not apply, and that is the source for Rabbanan, that not only regarding a maidservant, but also regarding a non-Jew, liability for being with a half a sister does not apply. Okay, now side point on this. Does this come to imply that, because Ravina says, gave this conclusion, so does he mean that either a non-Jew or a slave, that it comes together with a Jewish mother, that the child is totally good, because we always go by matrilineal descent? And so is that totally fine? And we say no. The child will not be a mamzer, because a mamzer only results from inisur karet, according to most opinions, which this is not. So kasher nami lahave. Nevertheless, they're not totally kosher. Rather, we'll call them pasul. There's a problem with their lineage, which would manifest itself. For example, if it was a girl, she would not be able to marry a kohen or eat terumah. Good. Hi, B'Shiva Amot Ketiv. Now we challenge Rabbanan about this. You bring a pasuk from Devarim. The context of Devarim is talking about the 7 nations that lived in Israel at the time of the conquering of Israel, at the time of Yehoshua. Those nations are not even around anymore, right? There's no more Chivim and Chitim around. So what relevance does this have to anybody else? Good question. So we answer ki yasir ladabot kol hamesirim. Since the pasuk gives a reason for it, that having children together with these other nations, they will cause your children to turn away to idolatry. And so therefore, this refers not just to the 7 nations. This is a good example of a midrash halacha, where what the context changes, and there's no more 7 nations. So what are you going to say? Intermarriage is allowed nowadays because the 7 nations aren't around? And no, the Torah happen to be referring to the 7 nations that happen to be around in Israel. But the point of the halacha is that they may cause your children to turn away to idolatry. So this law applies also to anyone, any non-Jew who may turn your children to idolatry, and that would include any nations nowadays. Okay, good. So that's why Rabbanan could include it. Now, now this works according to Rabbi Shimon in lots of places. Rabbi Shimon has the opinion that we can learn something from the reasons that the Torah gives. And here the Torah gives a reason, because don't marry others, because they will turn your sons away to idolatry. And so since the Torah gives a reason, we can apply that reason and to figure out what cases are permitted and what are prohibited. So we are doresh the reasons of the mikra. The reasons aren't simply there for show. But the rabbis, there are rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Shimon, and they say the reasons are there for encouragement, but they are not definite, that you cannot use them to define the application of the law. So what are you going to do about that? And we answer simply, Mantana de Peleg Ale de Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon he. All right, so we can just line up everybody easily. where Rabbanan is are Rabbi Shimon, and those who disagree, the Tana that disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, is in fact Rabbi Shimon. So therefore, Rabbanan can line up with Rabbi Shimon, and those who do not follow the Mikra, who are not Doresh Mikra, Mikra, would be Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore, either way, you have two pesukim for Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. He can learn both maidservant from the case of maidservant and non-Jew from this pasuk here, whereas Rabbanan can learn it from maidservant from Shemot and the non-Jew from Devarim, and these Rabbanan will derive the reason for the Mikra like Rabbi Shimon does, whereas Yosef Rabbi Yehuda could be the Rabbanan against Rabbi Shimon who do not are not Doresh Mikra. Amud Bet, we have a long Mishnah that deals with a series of cases of mixed identity. We have two sisters, and we don't know which one someone did kiddushin with. Okay, the cases get successively more complicated, but they're actually all based on the same fundamental couple of principles. So they're not actually as complicated as they seem. All right, mi shekidesh achat mishyote ahayot. Someone did kiddushin with one of two sisters, but he does not know which of the two sisters he did kiddushin with. You ask, how could that happen? Well, maybe they're identical sisters, or maybe they did it through a shaliach. He sent a messenger, or the two sisters sent a messenger to receive the kiddushin. Kiddushin can be done by messenger, and the messengers got mixed up. Okay, however it happened, it happened. So now what are you going to do? Noten get lazo v'get lazo. He cannot go ahead and be with either one of them because of a prohibition of two sisters. If he did kiddushin with sister A, then he's not allowed to be with sister B, and vice versa. So therefore, he has to divorce both of them and cannot marry either one until one should die. Then he could. Now, met, if he dies, then he dies without children, and he has a brother. So that brother has to do chalisa with both of them. The reason for this is based on two principles. These are the main two principles we're going to need for the rest of the Mishnah. One is called ahot zekukato. One may not be with the sister of the Yevamah, because he has a zikah there, and that zikah is like a marriage, and so therefore it's an extension. Just like you can't be married to sisters, so too you cannot have a zikah with one and then be with her sister. So the sister who is not a Yevamah is prohibited. Another principle is achot halusato. After someone does halitza with one woman, that halitza itself is like they were married and then divorced. And so that connection remains, and therefore, just like you cannot marry the sister of a divorcee, you can't be married to two sisters as long as both are alive. So too, one cannot go ahead and marry the sister of someone with whom one did chalisa. And that's why this brother has to do chalisa to both of them. He does chalisa to one first. If that was the Yevamah, then the sister is eshet halusato. And if it was not the Yevamah and he does chalisa with her, then the other one is the Yevamah and requires chalisa also. We don't know which one's which, and he certainly cannot do yibum with either of them. And so you both need chalisa in order to go free. Okay, now, next more complicated. Hayulo shenayim. The same case where one man does kiddushin with one of the sisters but doesn't know which one, and he dies, but he has two brothers. Now there is actually a possibility of someone getting married. Ehad choles ve'ehad meyabem. One of them does chalitza, and one of them can do yibum. Why? One of them does chalitza. If he does chalitza with the Yevamah, the one that actually had the kiddushin, then she is good and free to go. The other one has no zikah anymore, and the brother, right, who did not do the chalisa, he is allowed to be with her. So that would be wouldn't be yibum, but rather that would just be kiddushin. So he is with her, do kiddushin, do nisuin, and they can live happily ever after. If the first brother got the wrong girl and he does chalisa with someone who was not the Yevamah, then that chalisa is just a random act and has no meaning. The other brother will then take the one who is the Yevamah, be with her, and that performs Yibum. And so that's totally legitimate. So either way, the second brother can either marry or do Yibum and be with the second one, as long as the first one does Halisa, just in case that one, it's random, you pick either one. With that one was in fact the Yevamah. Okay, so that's the case where it's permitted to have one. Kadmu v'kansu, if the two brothers go ahead and they marry the two sisters without asking a bet din, and so they neither did Chalisa first. Shouldn't have done that, but let's say they do that. And motzin miyadam, we do not tell them to leave. Why? Because if the first brother who got married is together with the Yevamah, so he performs Yibum. Great, he did a mitzvah. And then the other brother has no connection with the sister, and so they can get married, and it's totally fine. And you can always have two brothers marry two sisters. Whereas if the first brother went ahead and got married with the one who was not a Yevamah, now that is a problem, but a temporary problem, because that's ahot zekukato. So he shouldn't have done that. However, when the second brother goes ahead and does Yibum with the one who is in fact a Yevamah, so then that's because he did Yibum, that removes the zikah of the first brother to her. And so now retroactively we see that, oh, you know what? He did not marry achot zikukato, because from now on, and even retroactively, there is no zikah. So you shouldn't have done that because you have that temporary problem. But now that you did it, both can stay married. Okay, so those are the basic set of cases. And now we get a little bit more complicated. Shenayim, shekidishu shete achayot. Now you have two brothers who do kiddushin with two sisters. Ze eno yodea veze ezo kidesh, veze eno yodea ezo kidesh. And nobody knows which one it is. Again, maybe through messengers, where the two brothers send one messenger to give and the two sisters send a messenger to receive, and the messengers give one and the other, and they got the names mixed up and don't know who they gave this ring to and to whom they gave that ring. So zenoten shenegitin zenoten shenegitin, while they're alive, they cannot consummate their marriage because they may be consummating with the wrong sister, and that would be adulterous. So therefore, both have to give gitin to both brothers have to give gitin to both sisters. However, metu, let's say they did not give gitin and did not have children, and they died. Lazeh ach velazeh ach, zeh choles lishtehen v'zeh choles lishtehen. If each of the brothers has each of the husbands has a brother. Okay, good. So they were not the ones who got engaged were not brothers, right? These are two not related men who do kiddushin with two women, but they don't remember which one they did it with. But these two men also do have brothers. Now, when they die without children, so now we're going to apply. It's the same thing as the case before. We're just doing it twice. So because Shimon is now not sure which one is a Yevamah and which one is the Yevamah's sister, he cannot take either one because either one may be achot zikukato. And so therefore, he has to do halisa with both, and the same thing on the other side. So that's so they have to do halisa to both. Now, but in the next iteration, what if the same case, except that one of the brothers who does kiddushin has two brothers, and he dies? Well, then we can apply the same principles as before. Hayachid choles lishtehen. The deceased who has only one brother has to do chalisa to both women. Vashenayim, the deceased who has two brothers, those two brothers, echad choles v'echad meyabem, kadmu v'kansu and mosi'in miyadam. So same thing here. Shimon is not sure which one is his brother's wife, arusa. Which one's arusa? So he's not sure which one he has to do yibum with. And if he does yibum, if he has to do yibum with Leah, then Rachel is prohibited to him as achot zekukato. And if Rachel is one that is appropriate to Rachel as achot zekukato. So therefore, he has to release both of them. And he has to do chalisa with both of them, because if he does chalitza with Leah and turns out Rachel is the Yevamah, then Rachel still needs chalisa. So he has to do chalisa with both. And how about Moshe? Well, for him, Aharon will do chalisa with one of them. Okay, let's say he does it with Rachel. And if that, in that case, Elazar is permitted to Leah, because either she was the Yevamah, so he's doing Yibum and everything's good, or Rachel was the Yevamah, but Aharon already did Chalisa, and so there's no Zikah, and so Elazar can take Leah. And if they both do not ask a court, but both of them marry, Aharon marries Rachel, Elazar marries Leah, then they shouldn't do that. But if they did it, they can remain married, because one of them did Yibum, and the other one, even if he married after, is fine, and if he married before, he did violate achot zekukato. But since after the other brother does Yibum, then that zikah retroactively gets undone, and so from now on he is okay. Good. Now, lazeh shenayim ve'lazeh shenayim. Next iteration is both brothers have two other brothers. Both husbands have two other brothers. Achiv shel zeh holes la'achiv la'achat, achiv shel zeh holes la'achat. So same thing as in the single case, we just double it. So one of those surviving brothers will do chalisa, and one of the other surviving brothers will do chalisa. Achav shel zeh meyabem chalusato shel zeh, v'achiv shel zeh meyabem chalusato shel zeh. In other words, here we have a picture. Okay, we have two men who are not related, and they do yibum they do kiddushin to two sisters, but we don't know which one's which, and they die. So Shimon will do chalisa to one of them, and then and Aharon will do chalisa to the other. So they don't have to actually do chalisa to both, because you have a benefit here of having two sets of brothers. And so once Shimon does chalitza to to Leah, then Levi can take Rachel, because if Rachel was the original arusa of Reuben, then he's performing yibum. Good, he gets a mitzvah. And if Reuben was originally with Leah, so Shimon took care of that zikah by doing chalisa, and so there's no longer achot zekukato. So the other brother can be with Rachel, and the same argument would be on the flip side for Moshe's family here. Good. Kadmu shenayim vechasu lo yibemu hashenayim ela echad holes ve'echad miyabem kadmu vekansu en mosiin miyadam. Okay, if two on one side, meaning Levi and Shimon, they go ahead and they both perform halisa. In that case, on the other side, these two cannot both perform yibum. The reason is that the first one that does yibum may have the wrong sister, and then it would be taking achot zekukato. So we should not do that. Rather, this will go back to the one of the second case that we talked about, and one will do chalisa and the other do yibum, and that's fine. However, if both do go against and don't ask the court, and both do perform yibum or whatever, or marry one and the other, then we do not remove them, because even if the second, the one who did yibum came second, the first one did violate achot zekukato, but after the brother does yibum, then they removes the zikah, and from now on they will be permitted to each other. The Mishnah has basically the same couple of principles repeated in case after case. So the Gemara is going to wonder about the redundancy and what we learn from each clause in the Mishnah. So first we try out and say, Shema mina kiddushin she'en misrin lebi'ah havu kiddushin. Regarding the very first case where there's a man married to did kiddushin with one person, but doesn't know if it's her or her sister, and you have to give a get to both of them. So isn't that kind of obvious? What are we learning from this? And so now we suggest that perhaps we can learn a resolution from here to a machloket that we have elsewhere. The machloket elsewhere is regarding kiddushin. Someone does kiddushin, and for whatever reason, that kiddushin cannot be consummated. Is that even considered kiddushin because it can't go anywhere? Right? It's a dead end relationship. So we can learn from here that it is kiddushin because, after all, here's a case where, because he doesn't know which of the sisters he did kiddushin with, there's no possibility for him ever to consummate the marriage, and yet he has to give a get to both of them, which means the kiddushin did take effect. So perhaps that's why he's teaching us this this clause in order to resolve that question that we had. But no, we say no, not necessarily. It could be that this is a case where when he did kiddushin, he knew which sister it was, and only later on it got mixed up. So when he did the kiddushin, right at that time, he could have consummated, right? He did the kiddushin with one sister, the other one was out of town, and so it had to be this one. But because he did not consummate right away, and then the other one comes in, and they're twin sisters, and now he doesn't know anymore. That's what's talking about a case. So, but initially in this case, the kiddushin took effect because at the time of kiddushin, he was sure who it was. And in fact, there's not just a possibility. This is the best reading of the Mishnah. The katani ve'eno yodea, ve'lo katani eno ve'eno yadua shemamida. It doesn't say that it was not known ever. It says he does not know. He doesn't know now, but it was known. And so therefore, we cannot learn that from this case. Okay, Maya Kamash Matlan. All right, if so, what is this clause, the first clause of the Mishnah, even teaching us that he has to give a get to both? I'll answer, you're right. We don't need to know that he has to give a get to both. That's obvious. But we have to set up the case for the next one, which is met velo achechad. If he dies and he has one brother, choles lishtehen, that brother has to do chalisa for both. Hayu lo shenayim echad choles ve'echad me'abem. And if he had two brothers, two surviving brothers, then one can do chalisa and one can do yibum. And this is important to teach us. Davka michalas vadar yibumeh, avad yibumeh beresha. You have to have one brother do chalisa first. You cannot do yibum first, because if you do yibum first and he gets the wrong sister who was not the Yevamah, then that's called achot zekukato, and that is prohibited. It's like it's like there's a zikah. The zikah is like he's married to the Yevamah. Now he's going and taking this Yevamah's sister. That's achot zekukato. So one brother has to do chalisa first, and that way that chalisa, if that is the Yevamah, will undo any zikah, and it's not the Yevamah, then the other brother is just doing yibum, and so it's teaching us the order is important. Okay, the next clause. Now we're going to go through the same exercise again. Shanayim shekiddushu shete achayot. Two unrelated men perform kiddushin on two sisters, and they don't know which one it is. Shemamina kiddushin shen misun bi'ah havu kiddushin. So perhaps from here we can learn that principle, that when you do kiddushin, even though it's not possible to consummate and do bi'ah, nevertheless it is kiddushin, because look, in this case, these two men, they don't know which sister they did kiddushin with. So neither of them can consummate, because it may be the other guy's arusa, and that would be adultery. And yet we call it kiddushin, which we know because both of them have to give a get to both women. And so that kiddushin holds, even though it cannot be consummated. So can we learn from here the conclusion of the machloket that we had elsewhere? And we say no, same reason. This could be talking about a case where when they first did kiddushin, these two men did know which sister they gave a ring to, but only later they got mixed up. And that's even a better reading of the Mishnah, because it says they don't know, not that it is not known. Okay, so then what is this case teaching us? Of course, they have to give a get to both. You're right, this is just a setup for the rest of the case. Metu laze echad velaze shenayim, hayachid choles lishtehen, vashenayim echad choles vechad miyabem. That if they die, and this one, one of the deceased has one brother, and the other has two brothers, the one who has one brother will do chalisa to both. And the deceased who has two brothers, one can do chalisa and one can do yibum. And we ask, Peshita, Hainu Resha. Wait, that's just an application of the first cases, right? You're applying the same thing. What's the difference if it's now two brothers instead of one? Two men, they each have brothers instead of one. Who has one brother or two brothers? It's the same principle. Oh, we might have thought to make a gezerah, that perhaps we should not allow a case of two brothers, that one should do chalisa and one do yibum, because it's confusing, and therefore even when there is because it's confusing with one brother, so therefore since one brother has to do chalisa, so you might have thought that even when there's two brothers, both of them have to do chalisa in order not to make any distinction, so therefore we need this clause to say, no, we do not make such a gezerah. Now, that much we could have derived from a case of just one man, but this case of two men teaches us yet something further. That the deceased with two brothers, that one has to do chalisa first and only then yibum. But if one would do yibum first, this is a problem, because it could be that then he would be marrying someone who's supposed to be a Yevamah and is not allowed to go lashuk, meaning marry an outsider, and he may be actually an outsider. So this would apply here as the case if, for example, Leah was actually engaged to Reuven, and so really Shimon, this is the Yevamah of Shimon. It's important that he do chalisa first, because if he does not do chalisa first, and let's say Elazar would do yibum first, but this is not his Yevamah, nor his brother's Yevamah, it was not the wrong family, and then he would be taking a Yevamah of Shimon, and she would be marrying out lashuk, right? Because these brothers are not related to these brothers. And so I might have thought that perhaps we should prohibit in this case and not let anyone do yibum because of a gezerah, that they might do it out of order. And therefore, this clause of the Mishnah teaches that, no, don't worry, they'll do it in order, and they'll do the chalitza first with the one that has one brother, and then the next chalitza with one that has two brothers, and only then perform yibum. Okay, and the last clause, now again here, why do I need this clause? Is it the same application as the ones before? Just that both sides have two brothers. That I might think in this case that someone will make a mistake and not do chalisa at all. And if you don't do chalisa, well, then the problem, because maybe you're taking the wrong one, and if he's taking the wrong one and no one did chalisa, then that would be she would be going lashuk. And so therefore, but don't worry, we're not going to make that mistake, even though in this case you don't have to do chalisa to both. One can do chalisa to each, and then the other two can do yibum. We trust that people will keep it straight, and there's no reason to make a gezerah. Okay, good. And now, last question about this. Mai shena mehadi tanan arba'a achin shenai mehen nisuim l'shete achayot umetu hanisuim et ha'achayot hadel chosot velo miyabemot. Now we're going to compare this Mishnah to an upcoming Mishnah, which is a slight variation. The slight variation is that the two men are actually brothers in this case. So there's actually four brothers, two of whom are engaged to two sisters, or you're married to two sisters, and they both die. So now there's not a case of mix-up. We know who is who, and they even are married. But here is a different problem. The Mishnah says both Levi and Yehuda have to perform halisa. So we're asking, what's the difference? How come here? Look, because it kind of looks the same, right? The chart looks almost the same. And beforehand we said one can do halisa, one can do yibum. How come over here you say that they all have to do halisa? Okay, when we say hachi hashta, what do you mean? You're comparing them? These are very fundamentally different cases, even though they maybe look similar from the outside. Hatami lemad amad yeshika, yeshika lemad amad asur levatel misvat yevamin, asur levatel misvat yevamin. Hacha kol had vechad. Okay, in that case, are two ways of explaining that Mishnah, either because of zikah or asur levatel misvat yevamin. The one that says yesh zikah would say that the zikah for Levi to Rachel and to Leah, because really they have to do yibum to both. But even if not so, right, there is a zikah to Rachel, and that because yes zikah, this would be achot zekukato, and you can't do Leah because that would also be achot zekukato, and Yehuda also the same problem, cannot perform yibum to either. So if you say yesh zikah, then they are already considered like being married two sisters to each one, and so neither of them can perform yibum. That's why they have to do chalisa. The other reason is because if they would do yibum if you say there's no zikah, okay, so there's no zikah, so right now they're not like there's no connection between them, no marital force of connection, so there's no problem of two achayot. So let's say Levi would do yibum with Rachel, and now with the expectation that Yehuda would do yibum with Leah, but let's say Yehuda dies before he's able to perform a yibum with Leah, and now Levi will not be able to do yibum with Leah because he is already married to Rachel, and so Leah would be achot erva, and so she would then just be able to go free la shuk. And by doing so, no one is harmed except that they lose a chance to do a mitzvah. And so that is asur levatel misvat yevamin. You cannot set up a situation where there's even a possibility that you will not be able to perform the mitzvah of yibum. And so that's the two possible reasons for that case. But neither of those apply to this case or any of our cases, because in our cases, one of them can do yibum, and it's not hot zekukato because someone is doing chalitza beforehand, and they're doing yibum, and they could say, this is. They could always say, this is actually not related to me, right? Maybe this was the Yevamot from the other family, and they did chalitza and was marrying someone that's totally unrelated, right? So anyone could say, Dideh kamit ramya, right? That he encountered, each one could say, I encountered my own Yevamot, right? And if not, then it's someone not related. So you don't have either of these problems apply. So even though they may look different, they're actually fundamentally different cases, and that's why they have different laws in their outcome. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.